History is filled with effective leaders, those who are able to influence others towards accomplishing a common goal, either for good or for evil. One such leader was able to influence and sway audiences of thousands of people, oftentimes causing them to change their moral compass and even to sacrifice their own lives. His countrymen followed him to the brink of world domination. This man was Adolf Hitler. Another example comes from ancient Egypt, where this man's leadership convinced a hostile pharaoh to release millions of slaves, and his leadership took those same millions out of slavery to the genesis of a nation that survives as a world power even to this day. Of course, this man was Moses. Hitler and Moses had drastically different visions, and although they were both effective leaders, they were not both good leaders. There are several leadership principles that are common to all good leaders. They include the ability to adhere to a moral code, which includes truthfulness, the ability to make a plan, the ability to delegate, the ability to deal with and inspire a variety of different people, and the ability to adapt and prepare to situations that may arise. These principles are not dependent on age, time, technology, or vocation, and they are constant, unchanging, and have held true through the ages. The first of these principles is that a leader must have a real moral code which he adheres to. And this was listed first because all the other principles hinge off of this one. In an interview with Mr. Seth Kaneen, who served in the U.S. Army for 8 years and reached rank of captain, he said that it is important for a leader to have a real moral code which he adheres to, for not only being an effective leader, but a good one, which is what everyone should strive to be when leading. While on the subject, he mentioned how truthfulness was an important objective moral. He said, "The best source for identifying and applying that truth is the Bible." So, when striving to be a good leader, one must attempt to lead according to God's laws as they're laid out in the Bible. And because truthfulness was mentioned as an important objective moral, and this is what we discussed here, although there are more aspects to a moral code. Obviously, while it is possible to be a good leader, or not a good leader, an effective leader, without a real moral code, to be a good leader, it requires an adherence to God's laws. And there are many verses in the Bible that speak about truthfulness. One is Psalm 15, 1-2, which states, "O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart." As well as James 5:12, which states, "But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under any condemnation." Both of these passages are describing the importance of honesty in speaking truth to one another. And this principle makes sense for a leader because in any situation, people generally want to build trust with their leader. They want to know that they're going to speak truth to them. And in the Bible, we read many stories of truthful leaders. One being Moses, where we read in Exodus about how he led the Israelites into the desert of Sinai from Egypt. While Moses was receiving the 10 Commandments from God up on the mountain, the people down below asked Aaron to fashion for them an idol so that they could worship it, and Aaron did this. So God told Moses what the people were doing down below. So Moses rushed down and told the people what they were doing was wrong. Instead of just giving into the will of the people, as Aaron had, Moses truthfully rebuked the people, because he knew what was best for them was that they follow and love God. So the ability to speak truth and love to others must be part of a leader's moral code. In Proverbs 11:3 we read, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them." So clearly, truthfulness is an incredibly important aspect of leadership, and it's part of a broader leadership trait called integrity. A more modern example of a truthful leader can be seen in Winston Churchill. In 1940, the Axis powers were closing in around the Allies at Dunkirk, and it seemed Churchill had two options. One, he could have the troops fight and they would all surely die, or he could have them surrender. And as I said, Churchill knew this, and he also knew that they were not able to handle, his Navy was not equipped to handle a full-scale evacuation. So he had his Navy officers issue a distress appeal to smaller civilian boats, urging them to help them mount an evacuation, which was successful and thousands of lives were saved. All because Churchill spoke truth to his country. Had he not done this and been deceitful and hid the reality of the situation, then the consequences would have been disastrous. But he didn't, so the British were able to stay in the war. Mr. Kaneen, as an Army officer, believes that truthfulness is an important aspect of a moral code and leadership, and it is one that stands the test of time. A leader must also have the ability to make a plan, which is the second principle of leadership. And a leader knows that there must be a plan, but the use of the word plan in a leadership sense is different than what one may think of in an everyday sense. A good definition for plan in a leadership sense comes from our Midland Classical Academy, A Call to Servant Leadership, or ACTS class, where in it, students learn about something called the There Here path. And to help illustrate this point, I'll use the example of a sports team. If a coach knows that no one on the team has ever played the sport, he knows the team's here. And if he knows that he wants his team to win a tournament, he knows they're there. And from there he can make his path to get the team from their here to their there, which may include extra practices or other drills to help develop their skill in the sport. In American history class, we learn about Joshua Chamberlain and the Battle of Little Round Top during the Civil War. At this time, Joshua Chamberlain was a lieutenant colonel and he commanded the 20th Maine Division. And at one point during this battle, his men were low on ammunition, maybe 1 or 2 rounds per rifle, and they were also low on men. And the Confederate soldiers were at the bottom of the hill getting ready to charge up and take the hill they were told to defend. And they had been instructed to hold all hazards. And the way Chamberlain accomplished this is he had his men fix bayonets to their rifles, and then they charged down the hill in a swinging door motion, which won them the Battle of Little Round Top. And it was all because Chamberlain had the ability to make a plan. He was able to recognize they're here, low on ammunition, low on men, Confederate soldiers getting ready to charge up the hill. He realized it's there, hold at all hazards. And from there he made his path, fixed bayonets, and charged down the hill, which, as I mentioned, won him the Battle of Little Round Top. So if a leader does not plan, he's just setting his organization up for failure. And throughout history we can see that good leaders are also good planners. But perhaps it could be argued that the need for a plan doesn't really apply in all situations. It only applies to certain leaders. And usually the example used is military versus non-military leadership, and how a lot of people might say they're incompatible. But I would say history tells us a different story. Because throughout history we can see there have been many great military leaders who then became great civilian leaders, and the other way around. Perhaps the most prominent example is George Washington. He served as a soldier during the colonial French and Indian War, and then of course afterwards he served as its commander-in-chief during the Revolutionary War. And after accomplishing his goal of defeating the most powerful force of that day, the British, he went on to serve as America's first president. And he did such a good job of doing that many people wanted him to stay on longer as president, longer than 2 terms. But his conscience told him otherwise. He knew that this new nation they were trying to found required certain restrictions on executive authority. So, for the good of the nation, he stepped down and surrendered that authority to another person. So clearly, the principle of having a plan was necessary for Washington in both his military and civilian roles. Great success as a leader in both military and civilian capacities is demonstrated by their ability to delegate. And delegation, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is the process of entrusting a task or responsibility to another person who's generally a subordinate. And delegation is a crucial aspect of leadership because in any situation, one person cannot do everything by themselves. Oftentimes, if a task is to be accomplished, it must be handed down the line. In George Washington on Leadership by Richard Brookhiser, he gives many examples of how Washington used delegation. One of them being how he delegated command of the country's artillery to a man named Henry Knox during the Revolutionary War. Now, before Washington did this, he tasked Knox with moving over 60 tons of artillery over rivers, lakes, and mountains in winter in upstate New York, which a lot of people thought would be an impossible task. But astoundingly, Knox was able to accomplish this. So for this reason, as well as his likable personality, Washington put him in command of the artillery. And then afterwards, after the war, he served as Washington's Secretary of War. Another example the book gives is how Washington put Alexander Hamilton in charge of the nation's money. And while Washington was still trying to make America a country, they were still trying to set it up and get it running, there of course was needed a way to handle money. And due to time constraints on Washington's part, he just wasn't able to handle that. And he knew Hamilton had experience as a lawyer, so he put him in charge of the nation's money. So we can see in both of these situations, military and civilian, Washington needed to delegate for these tasks to be accomplished. However, some people would say that delegation is a leadership trait that's only practiced by older or wiser people, and younger people really can't lead well, or there has to be a different set of rules for them. And upon first glance, this sounds like a solid argument. But if we look a little further, we can see it's not even valid, because in our MCA logic class we learn about a fallacy called chronological snobbery, which says that if the proof of an argument hinges on the age or time of the subject, it's automatically invalid. So we can see that this argument is saying, because young people are young, they cannot lead, which of course is using chronological snobbery. But we can also see many examples of young leaders. In our Great Books 4 class, we read the book Lord of the Flies by William Golding, where a plane full of boys no older than 12 crashes on a deserted island and there are no adults, so the boys must find a way to survive on their own. One of the boys is named Ralph, and the rest of the boys elect Ralph to be their leader. And one of the first things he does is he recognizes that they need a way to eat, so he puts another boy named Jack in charge of putting together a hunting party and carrying that out. And so right off the bat, we can see that Ralph employs one of the important principles of leading, delegating. So this example just shows that young people can still be leaders. And if we want to look to an example from the Bible, we can look at what Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. So we can see, even though Timothy was young, he was still able to set a righteous example for others. In my own young person experience as a leader on our school's robotics team, I've learned the importance of delegating. Because oftentimes, if I don't delegate, then a task isn't done as quickly or as efficiently or effectively as it could be. Or, in the worst cases, people don't want to work with you and they'll leave. And oftentimes, being a truthful leader means admitting to yourself that a job is more than you can handle. And delegation is one of those traits that can really make or break a leader, and it can be applied among all age groups. The fourth key principle for leadership is that a leader must have the ability to adapt and prepare when facing unforeseen problems. So this means that a leader has to be able to in some way prepare for unforeseen problems, and then when those problems do arise, they can adapt in some way, find a solution out of it. In astronomy this year, we learned about the almost disastrous Apollo 13 mission, where in 1970, 3 men set out on an expedition to explore the moon. During the course of the mission, something completely unexpected happened. There was an explosion aboard the ship, which caused them to start to lose oxygen. The mission control director down at Earth was Gene Kranz. And Mr. Kranz was a leader who had to accept the seriousness of the situation and speak hard truths to his team. And when this unexpected event happened, he didn't freak out, he remained calm and collected and allowed the rest of Mission Control to do the same. And they were able to find a solution to this problem that had arisen, and they brought all of the crew of the Apollo 13 back home safe. Another way a leader may have to adapt is adapting to new technology and new innovations. And this is important because they need to use these technologies to benefit the organization. In our 8th grade Greece from Rome class, we learned about Julius Caesar and his conquest of Rome. Julius Caesar was one of the first people to ever use a cipher back then in sending messages. So this example just shows that even though Caesar lived in a far less technologically advanced time, he didn't shy away from using new technology. He embraced it to benefit the organization. In our time, one only need look at the computer. With its invention, everything became easier. The access and sending of information and communication all became more efficient and easier. And in our time, if a leader does not adapt to this technology and utilize it, then he, along with his organization, is likely to be left behind. Who here has heard of Smith Corona? Well, they were a typewriter company in the 1900s, and for years they manufactured the majority of America's typewriters. But as the desktop computer became more popular, the typewriter in turn lost popularity. And in 1995, they filed for bankruptcy. And who knows, if the leader of Smith Corona had decided to embrace this technology, they may still be around, but he didn't. The ability to adapt to unforeseen problems is really key to being a leader, as well as adapting to new technologies. And by not preparing for change, a leader is, in essence, getting onto a boat without a life jacket. Good leaders can adapt to new situations and new ideas, and this principle is one that stands the test of time. For a leader to lead well, he must practice the 5th and final principle of leadership, which is that a leader needs to know how to deal with and inspire a variety of different people. In Richard Brookhiser's book, George Washington on Leadership, he talks about this idea by showing all the different types of people that Washington had to deal with throughout his many stations in life. One of them being troublemakers. One specific troublemaker mentioned is Thomas Conway, who was a critic of Washington and sought to usurp his leadership and authority. And when Washington found out about this, being a truthful leader, he sent Conway a letter telling him that he knew about the plot, but he didn't reveal too much information. He didn't tell him how he found out about the plot or how much he knew, which scared Conway and a bunch of his followers, and some of them left, but Conway and the majority of them continued in their goal to get rid of Washington. And the way Washington finished off this plot was he informed Conway that he was going to serve under Lafayette. And Washington knew full well that Conway was a very proud and arrogant man, so by putting him in this situation, it would be demeaning and insulting to Conway. So by doing this, Washington gave Conway the choice to either change or leave. It was a test of character. And Conway left. He resigned, and his plot against Washington unraveled. By giving Conway this choice, Washington was able to stay in control, not get involved in any conflict, and of course be rid of Conway. And this example also goes to show Washington's personal moral code, in that he didn't just want to get rid of people or cast them off when they messed up. He truly wanted to make them better people and better leaders, as we can see with Conway. He was given many chances and choices to do the right thing, but he didn't. So being able to deal with people, and specifically troublemakers, is important because the leader needs to know how to deal with them, because if not, his leadership and authority may be usurped. And he needs to know how to deal with other types of people to be able to utilize their strengths to benefit everyone. Along with dealing with people, a leader also needs to know how to inspire them. In Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he talks about this in his section on leadership. One of the things he talks about is how to make people do what you want. He says the key is to make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. An example Carnegie gives is about a store owner who had a lazy and reluctant employee who was not very good at her job. She just didn't want to do it. And her job was to be putting price tag stickers on shelves so people would know how much things cost. And when reminders and meetings and talking to her didn't work, he realized he had to change his plan of attack. So he called her into his office and informed her that he was making her the supervisor of price tag posting. And there was no actual change in money, but after this promotion, her attitude towards the job completely changed. She was happy to do her job. She did it efficiently, and she was motivated to do it, all because he had made her feel important, which, as I said, motivated her to do her job well. If a leader does not inspire people, then his followers will become reluctant to follow him just because they're not motivated to do so. And on the other side of that, we can see that if a leader does not know how to deal with a troublemaker, his leadership will be usurped, and the organization at large will be at a disadvantage. So a leader always needs to know how to deal with a variety of different people to bring out their best traits to benefit the organization at large. The enduring principles of leadership that include truthfulness, delegating, planning, adapting and preparing, and dealing with and inspiring a lot of different people are all key principles to being not only an effective leader, but a good one. These principles are unchanging and can be applied in all different aspects of life, regardless of age or situation. From Moses displaying truth and love to his people, to Carnegie's ways of inspiring a happy employee. These principles are unchanging, constant, and have stood the test of time. So I would encourage you to try to employ these principles in your daily life and know that they're timeless and enduring. And I think you'll find, as Chris Hadfield, the first Canadian to walk in space, that ultimately, leadership is not about glorious crowning acts. It's about keeping your team focused on a goal and motivated to do their best to achieve it, especially when the stakes are high and the consequences really matter. It's about laying the groundwork for others' success and then standing back and letting them shine. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Okay. Good job. Look where we are. Take a moment, look around. You've made it. You've seen your oral. Congratulations. Good job.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with some easy ones. What are your plans for after high school?
I plan on going to Midland College for 2 years, and then after that going to North Texas because they have a really nice medical school program which lets me skip a year of college and other things, like I don't have to take the MCAT and guaranteed entry into medical school, provided I can keep the grades. So
I don't have any doubts you're going to keep the grades. Which medical school do you want to go to?
It would be North Texas Medical School.
Awesome. We just finished our space settlement project. I got to brag about that a little bit. And you did the section on the medicine stuff. Did you learn anything interesting about medicine in that project?
Yes, I learned a lot about just how the body reacts to being in space and like microgravity situations and how people have been able to do surgeries in space and a lot of interesting things like that.
That scares me. I don't want to have any surgery done in space. The image of things floating away would... A little much. Okay. So why this topic? Why leadership?
As I've taken kind of more of a leadership role in robotics, I've just been thinking about leadership a lot over the past few years, and it's just kind of made me curious to learn more about it, and this is kind of just a good way to learn more about it. Gave me an excuse to put my time into this.
Well, good. And who's your leadership hero?
Out of all time?
Yeah.
Washington's probably the best example, but I kind of like Churchill too.
I would have liked to have known Churchill, I think.
Yeah, seems like a character.
So all these principles, did you encounter more principles than you were able to put in your paper? Or
Yes.
how hard was it to choose which ones?
I encountered a lot of different principles. When I was trying to come up with what I wanted to have in the paper, I had a list of maybe 10 or 15 different principles that I thought were really important for leadership, and I just kind of went through and wanted to see which 5 do I think these are the most important that a leader needs to have.
You really got to have.
Yeah.
Mm. And as for you personally, and I'll ask a lot of questions about your leadership, but which one do you think is easiest for you out of these principles that you have?
Maybe preparing and adapting, because I like to plan ahead of time and prepare. Maybe planning then, because those two kind of go hand in hand a little bit.
I can see you as a planner. Yeah.
Yeah. Planning,
Definitely.
probably.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Very good. So, what's the hardest for you?
Maybe dealing with people and inspiring them, because I'm not. Yeah. Yeah.
I hear that too. Definitely. I'm going to jump in a little bit and talk about good leaders, and I really love that you said that truthfulness is really required for a good leader. So the truthful heart. Is there ever a time when a leader shouldn't be truthful?
Yes, there are times when it's for the benefit of the organization. It's not for their benefit, but for others' benefit. Like when George Washington was going to fight up against the Hessians, he did not tell the troops they were going to fight against the Hessians, because he knew that they would be terrified and either they would leave or they would not do as well in battle. So when it's for the benefit of like what's best for the organization, then those are times when you shouldn't be truthful.
Sometimes the situation. Yeah. I get that. Okay. I've got so many questions for you. Truthfully rebuking somebody. Can you expand on what is the truthfully rebuke somebody? You have it in there as a leader. Let's think of robotics. How can you truthfully rebuke somebody in robotics? What kind of things?
You're telling them they're doing something wrong, but in a way that lets them save face, and it doesn't just completely crush their spirit and interest in robotics, but still informing them that this isn't right. I mean, if you're using a drill and you've got your hand on the other side of the thing,
that never happens in robotics.
Right.
It never happens. Yeah, never happens. I'm going to share the mic a little bit. Okay.
Well, thank you. Certainly enjoyed getting to read your paper, John Michael, and you did a great job. Never had the opportunity to get to be with you in class. We did a little bit of flag football together, and saw you learn something new there along with me. I threw so many interceptions, but you were patient with me. But we'll forget about that.
Let's do.
I'd like to start with asking you, can everyone be a leader?
I think in some way, yes. I mean, of course, everybody's called to do something different, which would mean they're going to lead in different ways. But I would think in some way, everyone could be a leader.
How about a kindergartner?
Yeah, if they're out on the playground and they're in some kind of game, and I would bet one of them is going to kind of take charge and help direct everybody and this is where we need to go to do this in the game. And I would think a kindergartner still could, but maybe not in the same capacity that an adult could.
So you mentioned the Lord of the Flies. In your paper, you mentioned that his leadership was kind of flawed at some point. Can you expand on that? And you said he was good at delegating for having the hunting party by somebody else. But talk about where his leadership failed.
Specifically with Ralph?
Yeah.
Okay. It may have just been, I would guess it was just the fact that he didn't have a lot of experience with it. This was probably one of the first times that he was in charge of that many people. And just the larger folks of that book, I think I put it in the paper, is just that human nature is flawed. So when you're dealing with flawed people, and especially if the person doesn't have a lot of experience, then that's where things can go wrong. And he wasn't a perfect leader, but...
What would you suggest he could have done differently?
He probably could have... I don't know if that would have helped, but... I mean, Jack was not the best person he could have put in charge of the hunting party. I mean, it seemed good at the time because he had the group of choir boys that followed him and did what he said. But Jack and a lot of the people that were with him were not really good people. Sorry, I lost.
No,
what was the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Don't know
Just
if I
what
answered
could
it.
he have done differently to be a more effective leader with a group of 12-year-olds and younger?
He probably could have watched them more and tried to handle what they were doing. I mean, he tried, but he probably just he couldn't be there all the time to make sure they weren't going crazy. But I mean, he probably could have just kept a better eye on, tried to monitor them and control them a little more than he did.
Okay. You mentioned a couple things in your answer I'd like to explore a little deeper. You mentioned experience. Earlier you had talked about, let's see, I forget the name of it, in logic, the...
Chronological snobbery.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, that don't just assume a young person can't lead just because they're young, and yet experience plays a role in leadership. Could you expand on that idea a little bit more? What role does leadership have in it, and a young person being a leader like a kindergartner on the playground?
Well, there is a certain level of experience needed when leading in what you're doing. Like a little kid can't lead, like I said, in the capacity an adult can, but in their ways, in their station where they are, they can lead. And like Alexander the Great probably had grown up around military leaders, so even he was really young when he was leading Greece, but because he had grown up and he had had the experience of being around military-like people, then he had the experience to lead the whole country. And he probably still could have led had he not had the experience, but it wouldn't have been as good as he would have been if like he had the experience. But
yeah, that's a great example. What about you talked about, I forgot the names of the boys in Lord of the Flies, but you said that there was something about they weren't good. You know, that kind of that moral character. Can someone be, you kind of made the point earlier, but let's expand on it. Can you be a good leader without a moral character?
yes, I mean, you can look at Hitler. He was an effective leader, but he, as we know, he had people kill millions of people, millions of Jews, and I would say he didn't really have a strong moral code, but he was still very effective as a leader, but he wasn't good.
So what are some of the essential things that Hitler left out of his leadership style?
Probably honesty, because if he would have been honest, a lot of people probably wouldn't have followed him. If he had come out and said, hey, everybody, I plan on murdering millions of people, a lot of them probably wouldn't have followed him. But, so yeah, truthfulness was probably a big one. and I don't know how much of a genuine respect or care for his people that he had. It may have just been, he may have really wanted to do good for his people, and that's how he thought he should do it, but I think it was more just about him trying to be great, and there wasn't a lot of like ethos of him wanting to lead for the people, and that he kind of lacked that wanting to lead for people, not just for himself and to be great.
Okay, well, thank you. John Michael, you did an excellent job in your speech.
Thank you.
I want to share this with you, let you look at it. That's one of Chamberlain's lost bullets that he could have used at Little Round Top. So if he'd have had that, he may not have fixed bayonets. But
that's cool.
It's my favorite piece of American history that I've got, but I just thought that'd be meaningful for you. Who are some examples of some good leaders in your life right now?
First one that comes to mind is Miss Telshow, probably. Because just throughout robotics, I've gotten to learn a lot about how to lead from her. So,
what are some things that she's done that have demonstrated good leadership in robotics?
Kind of letting the students take more of, just leading more in robotics. She's not overly active and just in on everything we're doing. She kind of she takes a step back and lets us work and kind of lead on our own more. So delegating.
I was going to say she does a lot of delegating
Yeah.
and lets you guys take ownership of it. Can you think of what are some areas that you've led in robotics? I mean, as a senior this year, you've had some leadership responsibilities. What are some things that you've been in charge of in robotics?
Kind of putting together our class schedule, because this year we kind of started something new where we try to, once a week, we'll come in a little bit earlier and have like a 30-minute mini class where somebody will teach something that they've researched and they know about, so they can come in and share their knowledge with the rest of the group. And so this year I was kind of one of the people in charge of scheduling that and putting that all together. So that was one of the bigger ways.
Okay. You mentioned George Washington being one of your favorite all-time leaders, and then just an interesting fact is, he lost more battles than he won when he was in the American Revolution, and endured a lot of failure. Can you give an example of a time that you failed as a leader?
I'm sure I have failed a lot. In robotics specifically, or
That doesn't have to be robotics. It could be in robotics, or it could be another area where it's like, okay, you're in charge, you're responsible to make sure the thing happens, and then the thing doesn't happen.
Maybe flag football this year is just because I just probably as an older person should have taken more initiative there, but I never played flag football.
Yeah.
Really know nothing about flag football. So I probably could have done more to try to learn about rules and other things, but I just didn't.
So what did you learn from that experience?
That I should have prepared more and looked into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, here's another question I've got for you. You mentioned in pretty early on in your paper, it says because truthfulness was mentioned as an objective moral. That is what will be discussed here, although there are more aspects to a moral code. So, you mentioned truthfulness as being important to a moral code. What are some other morals that belong in a moral code of a leader that you didn't have time to explore in the paper?
Definitely respect. That's really important because everyone needs to see that you value them as people and as contributing members of the team and the group. And that was actually, I almost put it in the paper, but again, there was not room. But definitely respect as being a really important one. You want me to?
Yeah. Give me another one.
Okay. I guess being able to love and really give a genuine care about the group, kind of like with Hitler. He didn't really do that, but I think being able to have a genuine care for who you're leading should be.
Yeah, I mean, what role do you think love has in leadership?
I mean, if you really love someone or something, you want what's best for it, and as a leader, your kind of job is to do what's best for your group. So in loving them, you want to do what's best. So if you can love your group, that'll help you to do what is best for them.
Yeah, I mean, in the Discovering Greatness or the Acts class, I mean, one of the things that we talk about is having a me there or a we there, and I think love is an important element of having that group there rather than this is about me. Last question or last line of questions before I pass it back to Mrs. Telshow. Do you think leadership is a virtue?
I haven't really thought about that much. My first thought is that not really, because I would think a virtue is something that's good about people, and you can be a bad leader. So it just seems that you can't really have a bad virtue.
So you can be a bad leader as opposed to a good one, and so...
Yeah.
Okay.
So my first thing would be no.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
All right, moving right along. Yeah, take a drink, because I got hard questions for you.
Great.
Are good leaders born or made?
I think made, because how you're brought up has an impact on how you turn out as a person. So if you're brought up in good situations and you're brought up to lead well, then you'll be a good leader. But if you're not brought up well, like Stalin was not a good leader. I mean, he was effective, but he was not good, and he was brought up in bad circumstances in his life, which made him a bad leader. So I think it's taught.
So if I desire to be a good leader, I can work at that.
Yeah.
And what are some things that I might do to like grow as a leader? Let's say RT leaders. What are some things an RT leader can do to grow into a leadership role?
Again, trying to have like a real, genuine love and care for your RT kids, and then a big thing is making an effort in being at RT lunches, and when you see just your younger RT kids, just be saying hi and trying to show that you really do have a genuine care and concern for them.
Okay, so you would say that maybe a good leader is selfless.
Yes.
What does selfless mean? That's what I'm getting from you, really, is to be a selfless leader and putting other people ahead of yourself. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. You said that military leadership things often translate into civilian life. Do civilian leadership traits translate into military life?
Yes, because a lot of people have been civilian leaders and then became military leaders. Chamberlain was a teacher, and of course he had to lead in that position, and then went on to command the parts of the Union Army during the Civil War. So it can go the other way too.
So I'm a veteran, and so do you think military leadership, I don't know, does it act the same way as civilian leadership? Do military leaders, I don't know, is their style different, do you think, than civilian leaders at all?
I don't think the styles are probably different, but the traits and the core principles of the leaderships are the same. Because in the military, it's definitely a lot more structured and more hierarchical. Whereas if you're a teacher like Chamberlain, it's not that way. There's different traits, but the principles are going to be more or less the same.
I have to wonder how Chamberlain handled all those young troops, if he really felt like a teacher most of the time, or. So I want to ask you a couple questions about inspiring people, because to me, leadership has a lot to do with inspiring people to do what you need them to do, right?
Yeah.
What happens if you have a group that just doesn't seem to be inspirable? How does a leader handle that? If you got a tough crowd, I mean, what are some things that you would do? Let's say you had an RT group that they don't want to go to lunch ever. How would you handle that?
I'd first want to know why, because then you can maybe help solve the problem. Like if they don't feel welcomed in the group, then you can try to get with other people and say, hey, can you try to be more nice to this person or friendly? Like if you see them in the hall, just say, hey, how's it going? So just trying to see what the problem is and then trying to figure out a way around that. And then, of course, there's a certain aspect of showing that you do care about them and that you genuinely want them to be there.
Again, that caring, that selflessness. Okay. What happens if a leader puts you in a job that you feel like is demeaning? How can I not be angry about something like that?
Well, if you, like Conway, deserve to be put in that position, then you should change. And you might feel angry, but you should probably just know that if you deserve to be there, then you deserve to be there. But if you were just kind of arbitrarily put there in a position that was demeaning, then so is the question how not to be angry or what to do?
No, I
just
guess that's just personal growth, really.
Okay.
I mean, the idea that sometimes leaders have to put you in a position that you don't want for your own development. And I think that's where I was going with that one.
Okay.
So, that's okay. You got it. Okay, let's see. I love Henry Knox. Do you know anything else about him? His personality? He was given a task that was crazy hard. What do you think his attitude was like when he was given that task?
There was probably a bit of dread, but then there was also probably that desire to prove himself and show that, hey, I can do this. You can trust me. Just to show to Washington that, like I said, he could trust him, and that there was probably a sense of he wanted to do that just to show that he could do it.
Do you think it was just to show that he could do it, or do you think that Washington had that effect on him, that Henry Knox wanted to please Washington for some reason?
Probably a bit of both, that Washington in some way inspired him to want to do that maybe showing this is what we need to do, this needs to happen, and I trust you in this way, and I trust you that you can do it, which probably motivated Knox to get that done.
Okay, and how important was the job that Knox did?
If they needed to get 60 tons of artillery from one spot to another, then they probably really needed that 60 tons of artillery. So I guess that was a pretty important job.
Well, and my last question is, how hard is it sometimes for us to delegate? What's at risk when we delegate something?
You're risking that what you're delegating might be done wrong. And that can just be hard because you want it to go right, you want it to be done right, and you have trust in yourself that you'll do it right, but you don't know for sure that who you're delegating that task to is going to accomplish it correctly.
Okay. That's good. Yeah. This is risky.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So, John Michael, I love sports and seen lots and lots of sports competitions and seen some really ineffective leadership. When you think about youth coaches just taking it out on a young kid that doesn't even know which end of the baseball bat to use or to run third base rather than first base and things like that. I'm wondering in your experiences, maybe as a senior assistant or in your robotics, other areas of your life, where have you seen ineffective leadership, and what are some of how do you recognize ineffective leadership?
Well, at robotics, we'll go to competitions, so we see a lot of different teams, and some of them do not handle their team very well. Like a lot of times, you'll see they're a lot of younger people. They don't use them as much. They're kind of just there, and they're not up there with the team when they go to compete. They're not. Sometimes they don't put other people driving. You'll see the same two people every time driving, and then the rest of the team's kind of just back there. So there's not a lot of delegating or just, yeah. I'm trying to think of another example.
How about the role of emotion?
In what makes a role of emotion in a bad leader?
As far as uncontrolled emotion, have you seen that?
Yeah. One team that we saw, they were not very... First of all, they didn't communicate very well, and then they didn't really keep their emotions in check. They would get angry with other people, and then they would take jobs, and there would be a lot of just talking behind each other's backs, and just they weren't good at keeping their emotions in check and not lashing out at people, and they're not a team anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So
earlier we talked about how everyone could be a leader, even the kindergartner on the playground. So if everyone's a leader, where does the follower come in? What's some of the characteristics of followers? How could a good, effective organization be filled with everyone being the leader? Does there need to be one leader? So I asked several questions. Take any one you want.
You can lead in several different ways. Like, you don't have to be the head honcho. You can be a leader in other aspects, because if you're in the military, obviously you've got the commander-in-chief, and then it goes down the line, and there's different officers, and they're leading in different ways. So not everyone is... There's not only one leader, there's multiple leaders, and then also no one's strictly involved in only one organization where they're the leader. They're being a follower in some other aspect. And then I think one of your questions was, what's a good follower, kind of? And I would think trust. It kind of seems truthfulness and trust. You got to be able to trust your leader and not try to take away from them. Like Conway probably didn't trust Washington very much. And so that's probably one of the reasons he was trying to get rid of him, was he didn't trust Washington. So I think trust has to be a big part of following, but not blind trust.
You made me think of another example of an economics book I read that said that these Asian pilots, they'd have a pilot and a co-pilot, and they found that they had more accidents than normal. And it was because that the co-pilot would never question the authority of the pilot. If the pilot says we're coming in at the right speed and the co-pilot sees some data that is saying, no, you need to change, the co-pilot wouldn't say anything because of that trait of being a follower in that culture, that it was improper to ever question the authority of the leader. I guess there's not a question in there. I guess I just made me think of something that was related. Sorry about that.
Interesting example.
So my last question is related to, you said Captain Kaneen said that the best source for identifying and applying that truth is the Bible. And so to find that moral code, it was best to find it in Scripture, and you read some both Old Testament and New Testament Scriptures about truthfulness. So how do you talk to someone, and I can promise you that wherever you end up going to school, that you're going to experience people that they don't believe that the Bible is the authoritative statement on what is right and what is wrong. How would you discuss this with them?
So in this example, they're not really Christian?
Right.
Okay.
If they're not saying that the Bible is the proper measuring stick for what we say is right and wrong, what we believe.
I'd want to know what they think is right and wrong. Because in apologetics, we went through and read about how if there's no God, then there's no real morals. So if you don't believe in God, then for them it's going to be really just whatever they think is right. So there's no real morals for them. There's no truth. There's no what's right. There's no true and false. But I mean, you could try to show examples of, well, throughout history, people have done this and it worked out. So you could take that as being what's true and what's right, just by history, because people probably would be less prone to argue with examples if they don't want to use the Bible. It's like this has been proven, tested, and tried, and it's worked.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing all your wisdom.
All right, just 2 questions for you. You can answer these in either order you like. During your time at MCA, how have you pursued Christ? And then the second question is, what greatness have you discovered?
Maybe discovered greatness and just the ability to learn, just being a self-learner and going out and looking for knowledge and looking for what's right and just wanting to learn on my own and pursuing Christ. The only thing I really think of is just pursuing Christ through leadership. And a leader, like I said, you got to look to the Bible, so you want to lead according to how Jesus would have led. So just probably pursuing Christ and trying to be, you want to be a leader and trying to be a leader according to how Jesus would have led, like serving others and leading. And
yeah, and I've seen you do that just as being in the same RT group this year, just you serving our RT group and helping plan and get like we're the first RT group out of the parking lot every week. It's awesome, and so I appreciate your planning on that. And then just through making RT group not about yourself, but just through our students in the class. So I've seen you do that there. So all right, it's this time where you get to fire the gun at us.
okay,
And ask us a question.
all right,
Oh, he's planned.
okay. So first for Ms. Telshow, do you think that Christians cannot believe, like they shouldn't believe in evolution just because they're Christian?
Should Christians not believe in evolution because they're Christians? I think evolution assumes a lot of things happen by accident. And I think that as a Christian, I have to trust that God has a plan and that there's an order to the universe. So I would say, I think it would be very hard to be an evolutionist Christian. Just because I don't believe in the accidental anything. God does not throw dice. So, I mean,
Okay.
that's my personal stance on that one.
Okay.
Amen.
Okay, so Mr. Blackburn, just there's different questions for all three, but what is something you wish you'd have known coming out of high school that you didn't know?
You don't have to be a perfectionist. Perfection's not required. Great attitude, good effort, but it's okay to fail. You don't have to get an A+ on every single assignment and test. And my freshman year in college, I stood in a math department hallway. It's a pretty dark hallway, and the grades were listed by your social security number. I think it was the entire social security number they showed back in those days. And there was my calculus grade on a test, and it was the first F I'd ever gotten in my life, and I was crushed. And learned a lot from that. But yeah, I wish I would have known to not try to be a perfectionist. And I've tried to pass that on to my students as many times as I can, that it's okay to fail.
Okay. Interesting. And then Mr. Schumann. What do you think is the most beneficial class at MCA?
The most beneficial class at MCA is the times that you're not in the classroom. It's the times that you're out here, and it's the free time that you have, because you're very limited in what you can teach in a classroom. I mean, you're teaching chemistry or you're teaching great books, and yes, you bring it back to the Bible and those truths, but when you're out here, we delegate a lot of power and a lot of authority to you guys, and you don't always make the best decisions with it, but as you make mistakes, it creates opportunities to learn from mistakes, and as you have your successes, you get to learn from your successes. But that's one of the things that's the most unique about the upper school, is you're out of class for, 15 hours. I'm not a math person, but 15 hours a week, and you just get to decide how are you going to spend that. And the choices that you guys make is where the real learning takes place.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And then world history too.
I thought that would be your answer.
Just underneath it.
Right.
Well, John Michael, you've done a great job with your oral, and I'll go ahead and close this out in prayer, and just want to say once again thank you for what you've had to share, and thank you for the way that you've had a quiet leadership that's that your presence is going to be missed next year, and so keep leading well in the remaining weeks that you have here, and then also at Midland College, and then into the medical field beyond that. Lord, we thank you for John Michael. Thank you for his leadership at our school. We thank you for just his faithfulness in doing work and applying his mind in his studies. We thank you for the way that he cares about people and uses the talents and abilities that you've given him, and seeks to sharpen those, not only for himself and for his own sake, but so that he can benefit and bless others. And Lord, he has been a blessing to MCA, and I know that as he continues to follow you and to follow your leadership, he'll continue to be a blessing wherever he goes. I pray that you would increase his influence and further your kingdom just through his life and actions. And it's in your son's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.